So a very warm welcome to all the members of our panel and audience across different time zones. At the outset, I hope you're all keeping well and safe in these difficult times that are persistently called unprecedented, but are really inching towards becoming the new normality. I am Neha Devan, Fellow and Political Affairs Officer at Global Policy Insights, and also the Research Coordinator for GPI's AI Policy Labs. It is my honor to welcome you all today to our inaugural panel discussion on the AI revolution, public policy, and governance under GPI's Artificial Intelligence and Public Policy Program that was launched globally this month. Now, before we delve into hearing all about the AI revolution from our expert panel today, let me take this opportunity to briefly introduce Global Policy Insights. So GPI is an international centrist policy think tank operating out of London, New Delhi, and Washington, D.C. The focus areas at GPI are international strategic studies, international trade and economics, sustainable development, and governance policy. We partner with governments, institutions, individuals, academics, the professional and private community to build a strong network of multi-actor engagement to accelerate socio-economic growth and effective governance across all levels. At GPI, we also have an international team with a diverse range of expertise and distinguished advisors, and we produce high-quality research, podcasts, interviews, publications, and a lot more with experts across a broad range of fields from all walks of life. At GPI, we also focus at collaborations at an intergovernmental and multilateral level to facilitate discussions on trade, economics, policies, and also areas of other political interests. Alongside artificial intelligence, which is our newly launched work area, we also have a key project that is the Commonwealth Project that discusses the role of the modern Commonwealth in the 21st century, given its mandate and influence. Within this project, the seminar that we conducted at the House of Commons in London on Commonwealth and its future post-Brexit was also raised at the Parliamentary Questionnaire on International Trade. And we also have an ongoing series in partnership with the Ramphal Institute London on Commonwealth, optimizing networks and opportunities for the 21st century. And we hosted the Commonwealth Secretary General, Baroness Patricia Scotland, just last week. And essentially, the ubiquitous underlying connection that links all the work at GPI is really its intrinsic link with technology. And that is the impetus behind artificial intelligence and public policy now becoming our fifth pillar. So to launch this event on this, let's begin this panel discussion on the AI revolution. Intelligent automation is now becoming an everyday reality of our daily lives. Now, with an unprecedented yet a 21st century pandemic at hand, it also invites an accompanying debate on the ethics, practices, policies, and international governance on AI, which as a field itself remains ambiguously defined at best and a parable for power politics at its worst. So to discuss whether artificial intelligence is the revolution that defines the 21st century or whether it is a necessary evil, let me introduce our panelists for the day. We have Uday Nagaraju, who is the co-founder and executive president of GPI. He is also the program director for the AI Policy Labs. Apart from founding this think tank, Uday also has an experience of over 15 years in the technology consultancy sector, and he is our in-house expert with a foot each in technology and public policy. Welcome, Uday, and thank you really for organizing this. And we also have Ivana Bartoletti, who is the technical director for Deloitte UK. She is a regular commentator on BBC, Sky, The Guardian, among many others, and is a champion of privacy, ethics, and equality in technology. She was recognized for her work on the field as the Woman of the Year in Cybersecurity Awards 2019. She is also the founder of Women Leading in AI and the chair of the Fabian Society, and also the author of the critically acclaimed book, An Artificial Revolution on Power Politics in AI. Welcome, Ivana. We also have Dr. Jerome Dubry with us. Dr. Dubry is a lecturer and researcher at the University of Geneva at the International Institute for Graduate Research, that is the Graduate Institute Geneva, at the University of Neuchâtel. His research examines the rise of digital technology in context of global decision making and societal adaptation, and his latest research looks at democratic processes, technology, and conservation. Dr. Dubry is also a speaker at the United Nations System Staff College and is the author of Global Environmental Governance in the Information Age, Civil Society Organizations and Digital Media, which is recognized as an essential reading on the subject. We have also with us Niro Ugwajabo, former special advisor to the then British Prime Minister Theresa May, the first person of African descent to hold his post at 10 Downing Street. Niro is a champion for social justice, minority rights, and young people, and has made several public appearances and is recognized widely for tackling discriminatory politics in policy making. And finally, on this phenomenal panel, we have with us Nishtha Satyam, the UN Women Deputy Country Representative for India, Bhutan, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. Nishtha is the youngest person worldwide to hold this office for the UN Women. She has also previously worked with the United Nations Office of the Resident Coordinator and the UNDP, and has authored several studies as an economist, futurist, and feminist. I thank this panel for joining us today on this exigent discussion. Just to brief everyone on the format, for the panel that I will be moderating today, I will be presenting an opening question each to the panelists, for which they will deliver opening statements to be followed by a subsequent question from my end, after which we will delve into an open house discussion between the members of the panel and then receive and discuss audience questions towards the end. If any of our audience members wish to still send us questions, you may please do so to Neha, N-E-H-A, at globalpolicyinsights.org. I also request our audience members to kindly keep their devices on mute and shut their videos while the panelists are speaking and throughout the event. So let's commence this discussion on the artificial intelligence revolution, public policy and governance with Nishtha Satyam. Nishtha, may I please bring you in here? And just to come from your experience as in a leadership position of an international institution that essentially works for social justice and public good, where do you see the digital revolution fitting in with the developmental priorities of our times? Is it really an urgent necessity to tackle the weights and challenges of AI and take it as the next movement for development?
Thanks. Thank you for that question, Neha. Oh, well, it's an afternoon here, and it's really warm. It's about 47 degrees outside. And we have a locust attack amongst other things. So it's a weird state of affairs outside home, but I'm really glad to be still connecting with you people from all over the world. It's really heartwarming to see colleagues who are here, and of course Uday and Neha, who have really been allies. So I think there were many questions, Neha, really in your question. So I'm going to have to break that down. And not because I'm paid to, but because I truly believe that it's important that when we talk about the AI revolution from a social sense, from it as a public good sense, then it's important that we determine a few things. I think, technology and a lot of technology events have always described it as the equalizer, right? Like, for example, I also see, like, even within the ongoing pandemic, a lot of people tend to describe it as the equalizer. But it's important that from a perspective like India, which is so diverse, which is so spread out, which is remote, and also a population of 1.3 billion, I'm not too sure if technology is automatically an equalizer from a social sense perspective, right? I think it is to be made an equalizer as much as the responsibility of the government. It is the responsibility of the private sector, and of course of multilaterals like us and the civil society. But what I really want to establish, that in its natural sense, if one wouldn't want to interfere with how the country uptakes technology, it is a problem that is anchored, of course, on access and affordability, right? Like, for example, and that problem amplifies when you bring in other parameters like gender, social remoteness, social strata, geographical remoteness, So essentially what it does, if we don't interfere or intervene intentionally, is to actually further marginalize the marginalized, which is push them further from the center of the economy. However, it is also an it's an untapped phenomenon when it comes to sustainable development goals, 17 goals that actually all member states, the world has signed up to as the vision and the charter that the world would take. But what is very important in the sustainable development goals is to realize that gender equality and women undercut those 17 goals. So there is no way. So there are two things that I'd like to establish here, and the importance of what I'm going to what I'm going to say after that is: one, if you do not aim at achieving gender equality in the AI space or in these new spaces, there is absolutely no way you're going to achieve SDG 5, which is the goal on gender equality, which in itself is a prerequisite to achieve any other sustainable goals, right? You cannot achieve the other 15, the other 16 if you are going to not achieve gender equality, because you're talking about 50% of the population. Now, when you couple that with a country like India, in 1.3 billion population, a country like India is not going to be able to achieve SDG 5 and therefore not achieve other goals, there is absolutely no way that the world is going to achieve its sustainable development goals. So that puts a kind of compounded responsibility on the country that I'm speaking from. Now, there's a very interesting Gartner study that predicts that by 2022, which is 2 years from now, 85% of all AI will deliver erroneous outcomes, either because of the bias in data, or the bias in algorithms, or the bias in teams managing these projects. And there's a big one sitting there, right? Teams managing these processes. Because you're essentially talking about people who represent almost a century of culture, of bias, of prejudice, of a way of thinking. So what we're essentially seeing now as UN Women are three big problems, or rather three big challenges and opportunities to really steer the AI revolution. One, of course, is the safe use of big data. So as we go on with the AI revolution, collecting data, how much are we responsible in using that data? Two is to code in the bias. I don't want to take the name of the company, but it's a leading job site. It is as good as anyone's guess. When you log on to it and you look for, or when an employer looks for a CEO, the site automatically throws up profiles of men. So if you had to get the profile of a woman, you would actually have to go there and mention gender. So what we're essentially seeing is we're at the brink. Yeah, first of all, I don't think we're predicting the revolution. I think we're in the revolution. We're in it. So when we call out to Alexa at home, we don't understand that AI is in our home, sitting right next to our couch. We're still talking about it as something that's yet to dawn upon us. It has dawned upon us. And at this stage, if we do not intentionalize what we want to do with it, we are seeing that 85% of that will deliver erroneous outcomes. Now, the relationship between AI and inequality is almost very, very clear. And the most critical link in this is that the link between bias and those that code them has now been established. So from a gender perspective, it becomes very, very important that when we look, and these are something that the panel may want to take up or may not want to, but it's very important for me to table them, that when we talk about AI, it's important for us to understand who are we talking about, not just what are we talking about, but who are we talking about. So we are talking about an industry which has 22% as compared to 78% men across the globe. So you are talking about a large audience that may or may not reflect 50% of what the population thinks, needs, feels, is going to navigate. And to me, these are, as much as these sounds like threats, these are big opportunities to bring in the social change that we're looking at. For example, in India, we're in phase 4 of lockdown. This is about, I think, a 60, I'm not even sure, it's probably the 67th or the 70th day that we're at home. And there is a tremendous shift towards technology that people have wanted to even unwillingly go through. And And so this is going to lead to greater automation as we go forward. The entire paradox of what constitutes work and who constitutes work is going to change. But at the center of it, we must put human rights. I think this is an opportunity to do so. At the center of it, we must put women, which is 50% of the population. And at the center of it, we must put intentionality of not allowing to code the bias, because you're not going to be able to decode the bias once we've gone too far. And when I say bias, I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about a number of things. I'm talking about caste, creed, religion, profiles, gender-based division, and so many things, right? So I think it's important. We still have that opportunity. I'm really glad that India has actually launched a large-scale program on artificial intelligence as a part of the last budget, the annual the union budget. And UN Women is one of those agencies that is working on that program to see how can we steer the AI conversation more consciously, how can we get it to do good, because it's not going to automatically do good. And how do we make sure that we are again not creating a force that's going to further marginalize the marginalized? I'm going to end there.
Thank you very much, Nisha. And you've really set the stage for where this discussion and why this discussion is important. And let me bring in Uday there, because in light of GPI's AI and public policy program, Uday, who do you think are the key actors that this program is looking at? Is the AI revolution the big thing to talk about, or is it actually just a buzzword and further a greater challenge, as Nishta has also pointed out? Please, Uday.
So thank you, Neha. And as firstly, as Nishita pointed out on SDG 5, at least for the inaugural meet, we have ensured that the 50% is met in this panel, where there are 3 women and 3 men. So so we have met that target, at least in this panel. Now, in terms of, well, I don't think a revolution is a buzzword. It's much more than that. But just for the benefit of our audience who come from diverse backgrounds, some purely from technology, some purely from social sciences, I would take a step back and go into some basics here. So what I mean, I think AI is the key element of fourth industrial revolution, which is a combination of rapid developments in information technology and biotechnology. Two elements that stick out in this fourth industrial revolution compared to the other three, which is quite important, is the rapid pace of development and its impact on almost all sectors. Now, these contribute significantly to the pace and the magnitude of societal influence of AI. And the key reasons why we are seeing this rapid pace is, one, the global connectivity, and also the access to knowledge. Let's just take an example. Let's take a machine that was developed for manufacturing in England during the second industrial revolution in early 20th century. How long would it have taken for that machine to reach a remote town in India? Could a person in that town dream of making such a machine in the short term? Could she have access to that knowledge? Could she have explored global networks for support? Obviously, no. But if you take the current scenario, it's a very different scenario now. A machine learning algorithm that, let's say, Amazon updates to improve their customer recommendations could be utilized within minutes if it's a global rollout by people across the world, even in remote parts of the world. And people are also aware of the innovations almost immediately, and there is access to good amount of knowledge. All this is contributing to the innovations at a very rapid speed. Now, in terms of where it is, AI is everywhere. AI is everywhere, from self-driving cars, chatbots, pathological diagnosis, product suggestions in Amazon to Netflix. Its effect is also seen in many areas, and it's bound to impact all areas of life. So, in terms of benefits, as we see, there are numerous benefits. If you just take example of self-driving cars, for instance, the U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that 94% of serious accidents are due to human error. So, automated driving can remove that human error completely from the equation. There's no lack of sleep, no distraction of mobile phones, no speeding, no drink driving. Imagine the societal benefits that this would have. First, the most important is saving lives of people. The second is the economic benefits, and also to the families, and also to the government. In terms of the amount that they need to spend on health, etc. But there are some challenges. Very rightly, as said, as mentioned by Nishta earlier, is one is the bias. There are some existing algorithms feed on data. Existing data will come with existing societal biases. So how will the predictions will automatically have these biases in them? Then there is another aspect of the people doing this coding, which Nishta very rightly pointed out. I just want to bring in another aspect here, which something that personally that I have been observing in the last few days. Um, I have been campaigning on social media for measures on better mental health from the government since the beginning of lockdowns, predicting that lockdowns can have adverse impact on mental health. I might have liked, shared, and read some articles related to it. In the last few days, I could see continuous social media feeds about UN and other international organizations warning that a mental health crisis is coming, is looming because of coronavirus. But the continuous nature of these feeds make me, I mean, I felt, they gave me a wrong impression that this whole world has suddenly started focusing on this issue of mental health after coronavirus. That night when I actually saw these feeds, I slept that night thinking that thinking that no, I did something great, and as if and I felt really great about it. Next morning, the usual skepticism kind of came in, and I checked with my friends subtly on their awareness of this subject, and then concluded that nothing has changed. It's absolutely where it was a few weeks ago. So it was in fact the AI programs or AI algorithms that were giving me those news feeds, which were making me believe, or the continuous kind of news feed, which made me believe that suddenly there's been a change in the focus of people across the world. So I see two issues there. That's just a personal example, but I see two issues. One, this could reinforce people's prejudices. If a person who's biased towards a certain community or towards a gender or towards sexuality of a person, if they see these unrelated unbalanced feeds continuously from people of the same view, this can only reinforce their beliefs and re-energize their activity and their commitment towards their prejudices. Well, no wonder political conversations keep getting more and more polarized because of certain this kind of pattern. Second thing which is not so talked about is the impact on general people's mental health. Already, the continuous use of technology and social media is taking a toll on people's attention levels, memory, and other indicators of well-being. But if people mostly see what they want to see, they might not be getting a full picture. Just take my example of how I experienced that night. People might not be getting a full picture, and it might be taking them away from reality, which could completely give misconceptions. In the longer term, that might not be that might not be a best thing. Again, and another thing, all everything that I like, or everything that I share, or things that things that I have read, articles that I've read, and things that I've watched, would all be data points. I would not have access. I would not remember what I did last week. Which link did I like? What did I exactly watch? What was the content? But an AI algorithm 20 years from now would have, say, 25 to 30 years of data of what I did, and it would have access to all the data and can predict my behavior much more than what I can do. So imagine I mean, how would the impact this would have. The corporations can use this to sell, and political parties can use this to influence. So there's many of these challenges that also need to be addressed. And these are some of the areas that have brought to us that are the inspiration for bringing this project, for conceptualizing the AI policy lab and the related AI and public policy program at GPI. The key actors, the stakeholders, would be AI experts, sector experts, policy makers, social scientists, academia. It's a combination of all the people. The world is not ready yet to kind of the rapid pace at which AI development is going. Though I don't think the world is fully ready, fully there. It is going. It's there. It's now. But the governance mechanisms have to be much quicker, and the pace of governance has to match the pace of innovations, so that it needs stakeholders from all areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uday. Indeed, there is a need for an exigent conversation on international governance of AI. And I think with you and Nishta, we've understood how AI can both shape perspectives and be shaped by pre-existing perspectives. So let me bring in Ivana there. And Ivana, you've pioneered a movement for equality and ethics in technology. But surely, how far is it that we have come? And what are the chances that artificial intelligence will become another instrument for humans to use, especially those humans who are in power? Ivana, if I can bring you in there. Oh, there, I think you might need to unmute.
Yes, I think
I have.
There we go.
Great, thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. And I just want to start by saying that that I think we've got to be very cautious about when we talk about artificial intelligence. Because artificial intelligence is so many things at the same time. And sadly, I think people across the world, when we think about AI, we think about Terminator, or we think about robots. And yes, of course, we have robots, and surely the media and cinemas are showing us a sort of Terminator and sort of robots taking over the world. But in reality, the challenge that we have right now is to set the ground rules and of how we are dealing with artificial intelligence, with automation moving forward. Because over the last few years, we've seen the most amazing things coming from technology and automation. And Uday was really mentioning some of those. And we've seen the ability that we now have to navigate, to detect diseases way before they manifest. Think about cancer detection. We've seen automated cars and automated vehicles that can actually, as was mentioned before, help us reduce deaths and even pollution in our streets. But over the last few years, we've also seen the worst of technology. We've also seen what unchecked, unaccountable use of algorithms can do to our society. For example, by automating poverty and inequality, and by encoding bias into the systems, and making automated decisions on issues that have so much impact on our life, whether we can have a loan or not, whether we have access to housing or not. Making these decisions that are so important to our life less accountable and less easy to challenge should we become the victim of a wrong decision. So we've seen the worst and we've seen the best. And this is the situation we're in at the moment. So I think the first thing to say should be that we love and we like technology and artificial intelligence so much that the challenge is how to make sure that it benefits everybody. And we have to say this because over the last decades, the dividends of the digital world have been so unfairly distributed. And this is such an important point that I think we've got to make, because especially at the time of this pandemic, and I want to talk about this, the response that we are giving to coronavirus all across the world builds on the trends that we've seen in our digital world over the last decades. And surveillance is one of those. Datafication is one of those. The mantra of techno-solutionism. And we've seen the response to coronavirus all across the world, in India, like in the UK, like in the US, and everywhere, which is building on those trends. And we are, and you said it really beautifully at the beginning, we are in a situation of emergency with no expiry date, where we are at risk that a lot of the things that we are embedding and creating right now so quickly, with much less checks and balances than we would normally have, will become permanent. So if companies now want to automate and do it faster, because we've learned that we have to be flexible, we've learned that we have to digitize so that we can compete in a global world in a pandemic, then companies will do it quickly. And will they do it with the same checks and balances that you would normally put in place? But at the same time, this pandemic has also shown us how interdependent and interconnected we all are as individuals. That my health is very much related to yours. If we come in contact, this sense of interdependence and interconnection is really important to build an ethical approach to new technologies, because we are in a time where we need to harness the value of data, we need to harness the value of technologies, but we have to do so without sleepwalking into surveillance, without sleepwalking into bias encoded into our systems. So we are in a strategic moment right now, and I say we are in a watershed moment right now. We are in a sort of really crossroads, and this is why the work that you're doing is particularly important, and specifically now, and the global dimension that you're putting into the work is very important, because this is a time where we can either rethink our digital space and say we are building that digital space on empathy, solidarity, rather than on division and manipulation. Because what we've created over the last decade, also because of lack of regulation, is an infrastructure and an architecture of persuasion and manipulation, which is our digital space. As was mentioned before, where a space where divisive comments, recommendations, the detriment to our personal autonomy in life, the ability to choose what we like, and not having a supercomputer pointed at us all the time, telling us what we're going to like, what we're going to do, and even what we're going to vote for. So we either build and bring democracy at the heart of our technological revolution, or we sleepwalk into something much more dangerous, much more challenging. That is what is a risk right now. All this requires policy and governance. And there are two challenges with this. The first is, we are at the time of increasing nationalism and populism. And how do we bring that global governance element that we need? How do we make it relevant at a time of increasing nationalism and increasing populism? I work in privacy law, and I struggle right now because I would like to talk about how we harness public health data global level to really fight COVID and to really improve our algorithms and public health knowledge. But this is happening at a time of data nationalism or data sovereignty. The debate around data is more about data location and provenance rather than what we're going to do together as a world to improve our knowledge of COVID. What I'm saying is we've got to think globally, but it's very difficult to think globally at the time where we're facing increased nationalism, which is also fueled online. The second thing is who is going to take part in this process. And it was mentioned a lot before, sort of the diversity into this. Now, when we talk ethics, I always say, whose ethics are we talking about? Is that the ethics of Mark Zuckerberg? Or is it the ethics of a diverse population across the world shaping our global digital spaces? And how are we going to create that participation and engagement is absolutely crucial. Ethics has become a little bit of a buzzword recently. And that is also because it's great to talk ethics, but what we need is clear governance at global level around what is AI capable of doing, but also can we agree what we do not want AI to do. Do we want automated weapons deciding whether or not to kill somebody? Do we want, how far do we want to go in terms of automation of jobs, in terms of how do we, in terms of the automation of labor, the automation of automation that is happening with machine learning? We've got to have the courage to introduce new ideas, to think beyond the way that we thought so far, but also to bring a lot of people into these conversations and understand how we can enshrine our digital rights in our rights as digital citizens in the global governance and global tools that we need to, and the new ones that we need to develop. This is why this remit of global policy insight is very important. You know, what are the policies? What is the global framework that we need to establish? The last thing I really want to mention is that we've seen yesterday what has happened with Donald Trump and Twitter and the debate that we're having about this, which is a bit distracting. So, but in reality, what is that debate is showing us, and the repercussion that is having a global level, is that we need to rethink the concept of duty of care, of empathy, in our digital spaces. There is no way in a world where we are always somewhere between being online and offline, there is no way that we can continue to think about the environment only being the physical one with all the rights that we have without thinking about our rights in the digital space. And again, this is the big challenge that we have for the years to come. And it's really important that we bring voices from every country, every background, to build a new global framework around the digital rights that we need. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ivana. And I'm particularly impressed by you really mentioning the necessity of defining the technological and the digital space. And of course, there is a question of whether the technological process is also a democratic process. So on that, let me bring in Jerome. And Jerome, let me ask you, how tangible do you think is the interconnection between citizen engagement and artificial intelligence? And what is the possibility that the more we talk about protecting data and data privacy, the closer we might be pushing it to the realms of national interest and security, where the state might end up being in charge? Jerome, if I can have you in on that.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for this opportunity to share some ideas. I would like to start by coming back to this definition of AI and saying very briefly that indeed there are different levels of what we understand as AI, and we are at the moment at the stage of what we call the artificial narrow intelligence. So what the previous speakers have mentioned, but when we talk about the point of singularity, which is when the artificial intelligence will be the most intelligent species on the planet. This is, for the future. This is not something that we know or we can actually envisage today. And why do I say that? I say that because when we're talking about policy, when we're talking about regulation and governance, we need also to consider two things. The first one is to know that this is an ongoing process. And so the governance and the regulation processes we have today may actually not be adapted to a technology that is changing so fast and that is changing towards application that we don't know of yet. It's as if we were in the 90s and we were thinking, what will be the future applications of the internet? I'm sure in the 90s, we didn't know that something like Snapchat could exist, or Instagram. So this makes regulation and the role of the state extremely challenging. And we see that today with the COVID-19. I mean, this, you know, when I listen to podcasts or I read articles, and the only thing I see around basically is nobody knows anything, you know. So it's very difficult for the state to address this situation. And I think that for AI, it's a little bit like this. Who knows about AI? Well, the ones who develop AI. And who are those? Well, it's a couple of companies in the Silicon Valley and a couple of companies, state-owned or state-related companies in China. So, and they develop the future of artificial intelligence in complete opacity. So there as well, it's very difficult for the state in liberal democracies to actually identify what will be the future of this technology and the impact of this technology on data and on our privacy. And as well, the ones who develop artificial intelligence today, they have access to a large amount of data. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of cash, they have an innovation capacity, and they have a strong influence on politics and the public opinion. So if you combine these characteristics, you can measure the amount of power that they have, and they're as well challenging the role of the state again. And we see that when we're talking about the governance and the regulation of cyberspace, where these technologies based, these tech companies, they more or less do, you know, at least so far, they've been very free to do basically what they wanted. So the role of the state is definitely challenged by these new technologies. And I don't want to adopt a pessimist view, because it's very easy to say, well, artificial intelligence is basically threatening democracy and it's very bad. And I don't want to also adopt only an optimistic view of democracy, of artificial intelligence that says that actually technology is going to solve everything. I think it's very difficult to find a middle ground and to find like a balanced approach to actually be able to describe and assess what this technology is about today and in the future. What I see, three elements that I wanted to highlight. The first one is the fact that, and it has been already mentioned previously, but I think it's very important. It's the fact that artificial intelligence and in general, emergent technologies, not just artificial intelligence, but emergent technologies in general, they will increase the digital divide. So digital divide as well, we talked about gender. This is a very important aspect, but as well, digital divide between the few countries who have the AI capacity and the many countries who don't. And then as well, this, we can already see this. We can already see this digital divide today if we look at the level of the states with, for example, the lethal autonomous weapons. Who is developing the lethal autonomous weapons? And if you have the capacity to develop lethal autonomous weapons, you are basically defining the future of warfare, and it gives you a huge advantage. And I'll finish with conservation and with nature conservation, which is actually a very interesting topic to look at how artificial intelligence is used, because on the one hand, it helps civil society organizations, international organizations to better understand climate change, to better model the future scenarios of climate change, to better monitor biodiversity. And there are lots of initiatives partnering with Microsoft, for example. I'm thinking of AI for Earth or HP, where you have civil society organizations, international organizations, and the private sector who partner to protect nature, to fight against poaching, for example, to use AI to analyze thousands and thousands of hours of videos of drones surveilling parks and endangered species. So this is very positive. And thanks to that, we can include more data from citizen science as well. So it's extremely positive, and we can see really positive application of AI. But the challenge is that when you become more tech dependent, then you put these large tech companies at the center of conservation and the effort of conservation. And so civil society organization and international organizations, and I'll finish with that, they increasing, what happens is twofold. The first thing is that on the one hand, the tech companies, they choose who they want to partner with. So they will partner with WWF, they will partner with large organizations who are very visible so that this can improve their brand, but they will not partner with organizations that are not as visible. And on the other hand, they will define, for example, to protect elephants, because elephants are also more visible than other endangered species. So they will get to choose the conservation agenda. And so these are that's why I think nature conservation is a good field to look at how positive and challenging artificial intelligence can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerome. And you're very perfectly put together the fine balance that lies between artificial intelligence as a tool for the citizens, and on the other hand is, it easily becoming a crisis of commercialization and security. But on that aspect, let me bring in Niro. And Niro, of course, your experience working as a special advisor for a former British Prime Minister, and you've seen both community development and you've also seen top-down policy. So let me ask you there that how relevant is social justice and the question of social equality in an AI revolution that is driven by government policy? And how do we tackle the issues of discrimination embedded in AI algorithms when we're trying to develop a policy which is, say, good for all? Please, Niro. Uday, I think we might need to unmute Niro there. There we go.
You have. Great. Thank you very much. And let me firstly also congratulate you for putting up this discussion. I think these sort of discussions are going to be an important part of the answer moving forward. One of the issues about coming in at this stage is that previous speakers have pretty much said a lot of things that I was going to say, but that's fine. What I would try to do is draw on some things that perhaps haven't been touched on. But just firstly, one of the issues that Uday touched on was the comparison with the Industrial Revolution. And the difference between that and this is the extraordinary pace, but also the speed with which it can go to different parts of the world. So whereas you might have had localized developments in the past, what's happening now can easily spread across the world very, very quickly. So there's a real challenge there. And I suppose it's good also to touch on the promise of AI in all its array. The promise is that this is reshaping economies across the world. We may not be able to stop it if we want to stop it. Personally, I think there's a lot of positive things that are happening that we need to build on. And the other promise is that this would generate productivity gains. And that in a sense, it will improve efficiency, and ultimately, especially for industry, that this would drive down cost. Yeah. So from my perspective, if that's the promise, then certainly AI has the potential to have very, very positive impact on people's livelihoods, on communities, and to help make the world a better place. But in order for that to happen, if you look at areas that have been touched on, for example, around decision making, how governments make decisions, how industry makes decisions, these are all kinds of positive areas that it can have an impact on. And if that is possible, then it's also possible that AI can have a very positive impact on social justice. If it enables us to do things better, then necessarily it follows that it will have a good impact on social justice. But that's the dream. What we then have to bear in mind is all of the issues that have been raised, one of which is the historical inequalities. So despite the fact that there are potential positive impact of AI, inevitably, historical inequalities, structural inequalities plays into the development, because this is in the end a human process, it's a human development. And those issues as we move forward cannot be ignored. I think the concern that many people have is that because of the pace of change, these issues are being ignored, and they are, people are identifying areas very quickly where there are clear challenges. For example, the recognition software that we've talked about, the algorithms that are almost racializing data. All of those issues are issues that are at this moment not being brought to the fore in a way that enables us to address them quite effectively. And when you think about it, I think one of the other speakers mentioned this as well, the state is almost playing catch up. States across the world are playing catch up. Some are more advanced than others in their response to this, but overall we can say that we're playing catch up. And the reality as well is that given the nature of the development, it's almost fair to say that states will always play catch up. And that's a real problem for us to think about. The sort of framework, what does a framework look like that can address this sort of challenge? Even though, despite the fact that AI is very much in its infancy, and we have that huge challenge of how governments can begin to respond to it and make sure that AI actually delivers the sort of benefits, the sort of transformation and innovation that we've talked about. The one key area I think in terms of social justice is this issue of biases. And I think you can see from the sheer number of conspiracies that have come up around AI that people are definitely anxious and very concerned about the potential damage that AI can do. And the biases that have been talked about in terms of gender, in terms of race, and in terms of class, potentially impact on jobs, livelihoods, and whether or not there can be trust in an environment where there are some government that are trying to use this as a way of monitoring their populations. Those issues are the sort of issues that I think governments will need to bring a policy response to. And again, as one of the speakers said, the response, to me, it seems like it cannot just be at the local level. There needs to be a global response. But as we know with the setup as it is, with the sort of lack of global leadership that we are experiencing at the moment, definitely a lot of action will have to happen at the state level, at the local level. And these concerns, the concerns that people have is that rather than improve social justice or social mobility, AI will actually make it significantly worse. So we already have this digital gap across the world. If you look at it at the global level, the developed world is operating at a significantly different place to the developing world. And the rate at which those countries are going to be able to catch up, there's clearly a lot of concerns that that's not going to catch up on time. So do we have the systems in place? Do we have the global systems in place to be able to move quickly to address this? The UN and other structures, I think in the last few years, because of the growth of nationalism or populism, have been significantly weakened, and the extent to which they can respond, I think that is a challenge for all of us. But one thing I would say is that AI is not emerging on its own. It's not an entity in its own right. It's people who are developing it. And we have to then make sure that the people, there is democracy in how AI is developed. And I think there are signs of that. So for example, there's Tech Emerge in East Africa, where East African countries are getting together to see how they can respond to AI, how they can stimulate the growth of AI within their own countries, and how they can enable individuals through tech hubs and all sorts of different solutions to actually come up with responses to localized challenges and localized problems. So there are some signs of good things, but for me, the most important thing is that for governments to do what they need to do and not hijack AI for their own interest, it requires an empowered population. Yes. So the normal processes that we go through in order to improve public policy, in order to influence governments to do the right thing, those things are going to have to be amplified. And in fact, what you see is that individuals and local communities are actually using these developments in technology to also turbocharge how they engage with governments and how they respond to these issues. So I think empowerment, capacity building, supporting communities, supporting individuals is going to be one way in which we can influence and get the right policy to make sure that government response matches the desires and needs of local people.
Thank you very much, Niro, for really bringing in a people perspective there. And speaking on that, on the potential of the future for AI and its regulation, let me bring in the panel to discuss whether AI will be a decisive factor in this post-COVID world, which potentially will be very different from this pre-pandemic world that we've been living in. And to begin with you, Uday, what do you think is the potential and its sort of corollary limitations of AI there? And where does the regulation question fit in for the future? We've seen Sundar Pichai many times talk about a proportional approach when discussing regulations of AI. Do you think a proportional approach is possible going forwards? Uday, if I can bring you in there, please.
See, one thing where I see is that the development of AI is, as other speakers have mentioned, is at an extremely rapid pace. So this has to be, it has to be proportional, it has to be continuous, and it has to engage all the stakeholders, including businesses, including including various sectors. So what I feel is the pace at which governance and regulations are coming, governments have to be well prepared for that, which needs engagement of multiple stakeholders, as I mentioned, a combination of social scientists who can parallelly continue research on what. I'll just give a small example of a particular technology that is currently being developed. It's not fully AI, it's combination of robotics and AI. There is this one foundation called I think called X group. So what they are trying to do is what this foundation does. Sorry, I'm just going to stop video of this person. So what this foundation does is they hold competitions between software companies to develop industry changing technologies for a better, safer and sustainable world. So one of their active competition is to create a robotic avatar system, which is a combination of robotics and AI that can transport human senses, actions and presence to a remote location in real time, making you feel that you're actually there. The idea is to sense the breeze, smell and interact with the remote environment. For example, my avatar could be shaking hands with speaker of Cook Islands doing an interview, and I could feel it here. So that's the kind of project that this I just remember it now. It's called X Prize. That's the name of the foundation. So and this for something like this to come, it might not even take decades. The project it's in semi-final for next year, and it's going to be in finals in 2022, though the actual winner might be awarded and the implementation might take some time. But just this one innovation brings so many policy questions. If my avatar is kind of is in Cook Island speaking to someone, will all these avatars have different passports? Will each individual have an avatar in all countries recognized by UN? And what would be the travel mechanism? Will it be the joint legal responsibility of an individual owning the avatar and the person and the company that is providing technology? So just this example I gave is just to speak about the rate of this one innovation brings 100 questions on policy. So the governance and the regulation for it to come for multiple and exponential innovations, because innovations will be built exponentially as well, and one innovation there will be further innovations within on top of those on that innovation. So which needs regulation to be continuously evolving and also at a rapid pace. Are governments ready for such a kind of to kind of exponential governance mechanisms at the same pace innovation? No. So these it has to be much quicker than what the governments are capable of doing at this point of time. So it does need engagement of different stakeholders like policy, media, policy leaders, academia, and all these people. So I think it has to be at much faster pace, and it has to evolve, and continuous checks on the actual process should be there as well.
Thank you very much, Uday. And just taking from what you mentioned, let me bring in Nishtha, because Nishtha, we are, of course, in a time where technology seems to be the driving force in a post-COVID world. But at the same time, we see, for instance, the WHO has been attacked many more times as it was previously in cybersecurity breaches. And of course, there's a skepticism with particularly organizations like the UN Women that this process is merely a digitization of societal biases and stereotypes. So if you had to do a pure cost benefit analysis, are these challenges in technical progress really worth it? Or should we stick to the good old practices of going forwards with social justice and equal policies? Just a second, Nishtha. I think we'll get the microphone sorted there. Uday, could you please? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that question, Neha. I think over the last 50 days of lockdown, I've just gone slower and unmuting myself. But so clearly, but honestly, I think what we're talking about in terms of a choice is actually not a choice. And I think it's very important for us to agree and reach a point of consensus. We don't actually wield, and any one stakeholder, including governments in a country like India, do not have a choice of thinking, should we go by with technology or should we actively resist it and go back to what we thought were good old practices. The truth is that we have to understand it, that we actually are not in that position to exercise a choice, actively accept it, and intentionally change it, right? I think, I think the time that the world is investing in seeing, should we not, what should be state policy? Does the state have a role? What are the principles of a democracy? Well, honestly, I mean, let me give you a real challenge, right? Even for the United Nations. Now, not because this is our view on a company, right? But just as a good old bureaucracy, one of the oldest in the world, we weren't very what do you say, upbeat, or even for that matter, confident of going on TikTok, right? But the truth is, 80% of India consumes TikTok. Now that's the truth. So we actually took one of our campaigns during the 16 days of activism, and we took it on TikTok, and within the first, I think, 8 days or so, we had 1 billion views. Now that's a lot. 1 billion views is a huge number. So honestly, I think we're all in that position where we cannot deny the influence of technology. We cannot resist it any longer because it's ahead of us. It's beyond us. But we need to intentionally use it for the benefit of everybody. Right now, I think the process of digitization that we are going through is a process that we are being compelled into. And it is the process, it is technology leading us and us not leading technology. So being out of the driving seat really in India from a cybersecurity perspective, from a cybercrime perspective, our cybercrime crime has been take to being online. We are seeing this data go up. Now, it says can you still hear me? Because it says my internet connection is unstable.
Yes, I think it's breaking up a little. So if you could just paraphrase the last statement or so.
Yeah. So I just think that, the issue of cybercrime for us is a huge issue in the country where the entire law enforcement has to be trained on it, but we can't resist it. And ultimately, unfortunately, we're having to do it. But, it's not an equal space as it exists today. It is not a good for all space. It has to be made into an equal space. We have to look at more people coming online. We have to work on people not having the fear of being online. Or expressing themselves in a certain way. We have to look at security and cybersecurity issues before we're too ahead or technology is too ahead of us. So yeah, just to summarize, I don't think it's a choice. I think we're already in it. I think it's important that we take the driver's seat, which will need intentional state actions. It will need intentional actions by the private sector. But above all, it will need all stakeholders to come together, because this problem is bigger than, or this opportunity is bigger than any one of us. And that's where I think the opportunity lies. But as UN Women, as our agenda, I think cybercrime, cyber stalking, and enabling as many women to come online and feel free and express themselves and use this productively is a huge, huge challenge for us. Just during the lockdown, just during this pandemic, which is the last 50 days, we see cyberbullying having gone up by notches, right? But at the same time, we also see that women who are at the receiving end of domestic violence, who probably are now confined with their abusers, can't make a call, are actually using the online platform to register a complaint. This is the first time where almost 50% of the complaints registered with the National Commission of Women on domestic violence are complaints that have come online. So yeah, I think it's about guiding the process a little to the extent it can be guided.
Thank you very much, Nishta. And if I can just bring in Ivana to respond there on who do we put in the driving seat so that, the pace of technology is not at a breakneck speed, pacing over about half or more of the population. And really, if we look at international regulatory mechanisms, the US has now joined the special G7 group, but with a different agenda, which is to counter China. So how do we decide who gets into the driving seat, and what's the discussion that they take from there?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So thanks for the question. So I think we've got to understand something which is really, I think, very crucial, which is the answer to the questions, the very important issues that have been raised, especially in relation to the potential harms and the harms of that. So we've been discussed. Of course, there is the individual harm based on bias. So, and the harm of being excluded, the harm of being locked out, especially as governments use automated systems to make decisions around access, around allocation of education, for example, possibilities and opportunities. So the more this is implemented, the more there is risk of being locked out of all this. And what was raised before is absolutely pertinent to all this. However, we've got to resist one thing, which is the idea that technological solutions will help navigate these problems. So when it comes, for example, to bias within the systems, then at the moment, what we're seeing is there is a plethora of companies identifying technological fixes to solve a technological issue, which is not technological at all, but is political. The problem that we're facing is the bias within the systems and the potential harms that come from the systems. They require a political answer. How this political answer is going to happen is a tricky one. And it's a tricky one because technology is progressing at rapid speed. And what we've seen, for example, in the data privacy space, where, for example, in Europe, the GDPR took 20 years to become closer and not even near to deal with the challenge of the digital world as we know it. In the meantime, the digital space grew into a wild ecosystem. So we can't be late again. But if we say regulation, we've got to be careful, because in itself, if I say regulate AI, what does that mean? It's like regulating mathematics. What are we going to regulate? But what is important, I think, is to think about what is the harms of the systems that we are going to implement, and is the legislation that we have in place right now sufficient to deal with it? For example, is anti-discrimination law as we know it enough to deal with the potential representational harm and individual harm that may arise from automated systems? Or do we need to define it better? Do we need to really implement new pieces of law to deal with this particular issue? The second thing is, the world has demonstrated with issues with things like nuclear power, yeah, that we have the ability globally, although with all the difficulties that we know, to implement measures to make the most of something, and at the same time recognize the harms. And I think one of the things that we need to do around this technology is to say, what are the harms that we as societies do not want in any possible way? One, for example, is the loss of autonomy, of individual autonomy. Do we really want our children to grow up being told what to read, what to look at? Or do we want them to experience choice and freedom as they navigate life? Second, do we really want things like individual consumer pricing? Do we really want behavioral targeting to really look into our weaknesses and hack them, to then send us adverts that are very specifically related to us, and they will increase the stereotypes and prejudice that we have in society? What I'm saying is we've got to agree on what the harms look like. And once we do that, I think we'll be able to say, okay, what do we need to do now? What is required to deal with these harms and to do it in a way that is efficient? What I worry about right now is that with COVID-19 and the pandemic, we're going to speed up automation at such a fast rate. What I worry about is, what is the role that, for example, workers will play into this process? Are we going to innovate with workers, or are we going to really impose innovation to them? How are we going to put in place the checks and balances that we need? And this is what I think we need to be careful of, because a lot of the technological solutions that we are developing, we need to ask ourselves, are they responding to a need in society? Or are we just innovating for the sake of it because it looks good, or because it's flashy and glamorous? I would like innovation to respond to a need and to a purpose, rather than just, be lured into the latest flashy technology that doesn't really answer the purpose that we need as society. And the last thing, really last second, that I want to take is about women. Over the recent years, across the world, we've heard this thing about we need more women in technology, right? As if the only way to solve the problem of bias, which doesn't only come from data, it also comes from parameters and at every single stage of AI deployment, is to get more women into tech. That is fine, but it's a small part of the problem. Because technology, and particularly AI, is not just about technology. AI is about power, global power, and geopolitics. If we want AI to benefit everybody, not only we need women in tech, but we need more women, more people from every background to discuss what AI is for in the first place. if we only focus on the coding room and getting more women into tech, then again, we're missing the point. The point is that we don't want innovation for the sake of it. It's really getting more women at the table when we discuss what we're going to use artificial intelligence for. More women in company business and company boards to say, hold on a second, hey, what are we producing? What is it for? What's the purpose? What are the intended and unintended consequences of what we're creating? So I think that's the challenge that we have right now. And when I hear people saying, no, this panel has been great, but normally so we need to get more women into tech, I just say, yes, fine, but we're not asking me to sort out the problems of years and years of inequality. You know, it's like women asking to no, it's really about governance and participation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, especially for the comments at the end. It's very, very necessary. But may I bring in here Nero and Jerome to react to what Ivana said, particularly in context of the changing societal relationships. And a big question that comes up there is whether labor relationships would change for the better or worse, particularly with COVID. What is the human cost? What is the cost of technology taking over human lives, and if it does so at all? And the second one is on activism, which is something that Jerome works on to a large extent. How does that change as well? So if I can have Nero and then Jerome reacting to this, please. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So a lot of the things that have been said, quite clearly, there's a lot of challenges that remain. And the reality is, what I've been wondering as we speak is the sheer scale of the challenge that's facing all of us. As I said earlier, I think the possibility of a global framework is near enough impossible at this stage. But if you look, for example, at the UK, the government here took the approach of publishing an online harms legislation, which captured quite a number of the issues around harms and around what remedies need to be in place, the responsibility of businesses who are running a number of these tech companies to really address the concerns and issues that arise from their technology. But again, the point that was also made is that there is no real link between the online harms legislation and other legislation such as the Equalities Act, for example. And if you were to take a look at the Equalities Act, it does not even recognize this whole issue of AI and potential problems. So it might say discrimination, and obviously if that means hate crime online, the possibility is there to address it. But the point I'm making is that it doesn't really, it's no longer fit for purpose, given how far we've come in terms of what technology actually looks like, particularly as it is extremely difficult to pinpoint where the problem is in terms of some of these issues. So unless you have a company declare, you might not even be able, and if the individual causing harm online is a clever individual, you might not be able to even identify that person or be able to say this is where the responsibility is. So the possibility of governments catching up in a way that is meaningful and sensible, I think is extremely difficult. So the one point I would make is that the way people respond matters a great deal. So I don't think we are completely just being overwhelmed that we're not able to respond at all. I think people can respond. So that's why I was talking earlier about how do we empower people to understand the technology? How do we empower people to understand the normal processes of governance? For example, when this online harms legislation was going through Parliament, how many people actually had the possibility, the know-how to engage with that process and make sure that all their questions are actually addressed? So that whole process of activating the activism of individuals, I think is crucial as well. It's a bit of a dream to think that we will bring this into some kind of a space where we can control what actually happens, because businesses are doing what they want to do. They're identifying what they see as needs and they're pushing out their products. for you to stop that individual business from doing that is extremely difficult. And so the way we have to do it, to my mind, is about what government is doing to respond to the harms as was identified. And I think the UK has a clear example with that legislation. Perhaps other countries will be following suit as well to put similar legislation in place. The other thing about one of the areas, if we want to really empower people to shape the way AI companies develop their services and products, is about the user autonomy, the ability of the users to remove things, to delete things, to close accounts, to do all kinds of things that enable them to have some level of control. Because in the end, these businesses that are providing AI services, they want to make money. In the end, they want to make money. So I think gradually, if you have an empowered user population, they will have to respond to the needs of users. Otherwise, their ability to make money will be affected.
Thank you, Nero. And I think that's a great segue for Jerome to please come in.
Thank you. I think it's a very good point to say that we also need to make sure that people, citizens, understand the traditional governance processes, in addition to understand how digital technologies function, or maybe to have some, I would probably say, I would probably distinguish between digital skills, so to lower the barrier to actually access, for example, information, or to access e-participation or e-voting or e-consultation processes. But at the same time, I think it's extremely important to make sure that people have the digital media literacy to assess, for example, what sources, the sources of an information, or to assess if the news that they're reading is actually from a valid journal, or if the information is misleading or fake news, etc. And I think that we need to indeed educate the population to develop these digital skills and this digital literacy. And I think that artificial intelligence is accelerating the need for that, because we are more and more influenced by invisible artificial intelligence support or help. Through micro-targeting, through all the computational propaganda techniques that exist. And there is an increasing need for the population to actually be aware of what this technology can do, and to keep, to make sure that democracy is resilient enough to adapt to this change. I mean, we've seen many changes in the past. Propaganda is not new, fake news neither, but the population needs to adapt and needs to have the skills to adapt. And so I think this is an important element to take into consideration, especially when we see, for example, there was one of the commissions of the UK Parliament, which said a couple of months ago that their election laws were not fit anymore because of the scandal of Cambridge Analytica. Now, when it comes to activism and how civil society organizations can use artificial intelligence, I think that there we really have the question of the digital divide within the civil society organizations and the civil society movements. Because some movements will receive or will have access to this innovation and others will not. And what is interesting, I don't know if you've seen that, but in the last street protest, people started painting their faces so that they would not be recognized by AI-powered cameras. So you see, it's a very good, maybe it's a very simple examples, but it's people and society and democracy can adapt and adapts to changes, to technology, to challenges. But we need to accompany this change. And you see when you have more and more people taking the street and more people saying, actually, politics don't work anymore, or I don't believe in election or in politics, I think AI is a little bit contributing to this, because the myth around AI and the myth around this type of technology is also contributing to a certain lack of interest in politics, because you kind of lose your power in a way as a citizen when you face these technologies and these tech companies. So I think it's the activism today and hacktivism both are calling for a new way to include people and citizens in democracy. And I think that Uday, you mentioned earlier on the avatar. And it's something that we're actually looking into at the moment. Can an AI-powered avatar can represent me and vote for me? And what does this mean? And if one day this is going to happen, what does this mean? And so that's a research project we're working on at the moment. But this is to say that it questions our participation in democratic purposes and democratic processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we've had a very engaging panel, but let me open it here a little bit before we sort of move on to closing the discussion as well. Are there any reactions from our panelists on what has emerged so far? Perhaps, Uday, would you want to step in here? Uday, I think your microphone's on mute.
Sorry. So I think I've been just muting and unmuting. I've been unmuting twice, I think. So in terms of, I like what Ivana mentioned about, regulating, so as, the particular phrase that she used, what are we regulating? Are we regulating like mathematics? That's so in a way, I think we have to understand the harms that these softwares, these new innovations could inadvertently do, and then start looking into areas and bringing in the ideas of governance. That is, that is a particular thing, and it has to be continuously evolving, because innovations come on top of other innovations, and it should be a continuous process. Is what I see. And also think about the skills that Nero has raised. Um, with one is the basic digital skills that general average population need to be upped with, but there also needs to be new skills that need to be gained, and people have to reinvent themselves from time to time. Is one theme that is going across, because if, say, for example, in a particular sector, a person has been working for 25 years, and if whole if that kind of job description is if that kind of job has been entirely automated, will a person in their 40s or 30s should be in a position to learn new skills? There is a need for learning skills at kind of middle age as well. So that's another thing that could come up in addition to the upping of digital skills.
Right. Nero, if I can just bring you in there for a comment, because you work with young people and opportunities as well. And this is also a question that we've received, that what happens to not only employment, but employability, and how can those involved work towards making young people not only employable in technical sectors, but also make them more socially conscious while working in them. Nero, if we can just have you there.
I've unmuted myself.
Yes. So if you could comment on that, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think, the future of AI is really going to be about young people, their use of it, and so on and so forth. The employment issue, I think, is an interesting one, because a lot of the technological development there's quite a bit now that is moving into that sort of education space to provide opportunities for young people. So clearly there will be issues around people losing their jobs and perhaps not the sort of pace that would enable them to retrain to be able to engage in this work. But I think, again, that's an area for policy for government, because there has to be a very clear effort to build skills of young people to engage in this new world of technology. It's not just older people that would affect. There is an assumption that young people immediately understand technology, and that's just not the case in many places. So I think there's a lot of training and a lot of support that will be needed for young people to be able to engage with the agenda. And then on the other hand as well, the ability of societies to respond in terms of the harms that we're identifying, a lot of it will also depend on young people's level of consciousness on the issue. And I think we can see some positive developments in terms of the ability of information to be spread across very quickly and for young people as a group to respond to these issues. But the only challenge with that is the point that Ude raised earlier, which is that for those who are minded to tackle issues around social justice, AI can amplify that and can support that and can get them excited and can get them taking action. Even if some of the action looks like passive action, there is a potential for that to spill out into communities directly. The other challenge is that for those young people who are living in communities where there's very significant levels of bias, then AI can also contribute to sustaining biases across generations. And I think, again, that's something that we'll need to look into as a community to address.
Thank you very much, Niro. And if I can just have the closing statements, and may I please bring in Ivana? And in particular, Ivana, could you speak in context of your book, which is, I personally feel, very aptly titled The Artificial Revolution. So if I can just have your closing statement there.
Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say thank you for this sort of great opportunity and for so many important insights that everybody's been sharing, and for the work that hopefully we'll continue to do together, bringing different perspectives and different territories and jurisdictions and ideas into this. I've wrote my book because I bringing together different perspectives and my whole life around it, really. But I wrote my book as a privacy professional because I do think we have to challenge the way that we've seen privacy so far, and this is particularly true at a time of COVID-19, where we've seen how our data, there's nothing more collective and more public value than our personal information. And how we leverage data in a way that is a public asset without sleepwalking into surveillance is the question of our century. But I also wrote this book because I'm a feminist, and because I think when we talk data, we talk about capital. And when we talk capital, capital brings all the inequalities, hierarchies, and even colonialism that we know. And data has this characteristic. And if we do not understand the power and the politics and geopolitics around data as capital, then I don't think we're going to be able to resist and to create an alternative to the way that we've distributed power in the digital space until now. And it's going to be difficult, obviously, but I think one of the most important things that we can do is to really talk to people and to make sure that people understand that when we talk about AI, we're not just talking about Terminator, we're not just going to talk about technology, but we're really talking about the way power is distributed in society. And the third dimension from which I wrote my book is as somebody who is involved in politics and loves politics. And I think this is the time to really put politics and people back in the driving seat when it comes to technology. And it's not about party politics here. It's really about saying, you know, in order for technology to work for everybody, we really have to make sure that we have a say in how the technology are going to be deployed and developed in the first place. And this is the challenge of our time. Is you know, we've seen it can't only be the glamorous Silicon Valley. We have to understand that behind that there is a lot of unpaid labor. There is a lot of lower paid jobs, millions. And artificial intelligence is reshaping the way that we think of labor, that we think of power. And if we've got to challenge that, we really have to make sure that we bring new skills and new understanding to the political landscape. And this is, I think, the challenge that we've got ahead. So thank you so much. And thank you for your brilliant moderating. You're great.
Thank you very much, Ivana. It was such an honor having you, and thank you really for starting.
I have to go because I have an media interview about my book, so I'll have to leave you now. But thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much again. Thank you. And on that note, if we can also take closing statements from our other panelists. Nishta, may we please have you?
Honestly, I think there's a merit to having to be the last one in the closing statements, because everything smart has been said. But you can definitely echo everything that's been said. And I really want to pick up from what Ivana said. It is a political, it is a recognition that it is a political problem, right? It is, and it will need a political solution. So you cannot have an apolitical solution to a political problem. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. But definitely what I try to also recognize, purely because of representing gender issues, is also the recognition of what Ivana said, which is AI is power. And the moment you recognize that something is power, women are not going to be able to negotiate that power structure by themselves. The very constitution of power structures is to keep them out by design. Right? And you've seen that in boards, you've seen that in politics, you've seen that in anything that is a comparable, if not comparable, at least it's an analogy in some way of power structures, right? So the only way of really getting women here is you can't keep them on the negotiating end the entire time and put the onus of negotiation just on them. We will have to bring women into the conversation. And not rely on a power structure to be enabling, because no power structure in the world is enabling. That said, I do also agree with a statement partially. Just bringing more women is not going to be, is probably not the only solution that we have. Yeah, when I say women, I'm referring to the spectrum of gender. I am referring to caste, creed, and I said this before, religion, all kinds of people. But what is important at the center of this is we need people at the end who look like, think like, behave like those that they are designing for. Otherwise, we will have issues that we have right now where we're trying to post facto mainstream gender, among other issues, into power structures, but then there's a lot of negotiation, and the redistribution of power has never been a happy process. So if we all want a happy process, we probably have to have these conversations right now. And I'm really glad and I'm really grateful actually to Uday for bringing us in and for bringing this perspective in, because this is the time that these conversations should be had right now. So thank you. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you very much, Nishta. Do we have any final comments from our panelists? Nero, please.
So I just wanted to say thank you as well for organizing this conversation. The issue around how AI developments are taking place across the world, I think is a very important one to just draw attention to again, in terms of the venture capital and the split of venture capital, where the vast majority of it is in the US. So the vast majority of development is taking place within that setting. And the extent to which it is sensitive to other things that are happening across the world is a significant issue to my mind. There was also mention of the gender balance in terms of who's actually developing technology at the moment. So I think those two things will need to be addressed globally if we're to get a level of fairness and a level of democratization of the process of AI. So thank you very much. Really appreciate being here.
Thank
So
you.
one thing I'd like to bring in here, Neha, and the other panelists as well, is the impact of AI. I think it is going to there's going to be huge impact in in how we live, how we work, and how we communicate as well. The political I think it's going to alter the political, economic, and societal systems. The world will be I mean, the world itself will be completely different if military has decided, if military might has decided something in the past during during the World War time, and if post Cold War it was economy which was defining a country's position on the globe, it will be the AI strategy that the governments are developing now, which is going to define a nation's capability and their success in the post in the current world. Um, that is the level of importance that I can see. And some countries, if we see US and China are really doing quite well in terms of their research. US is investing more, but we see China is doing more onto national strategy, and US is doing more on more into private investments. But there is opportunity for other countries like Israel, India. Israel is doing well on research. UK is also doing reasonably well. India, with its huge middle class population, also has an opportunity. But then it's also, the inequalities, the digital divide will add to inequalities, and certain countries could be left out, like Kenya, Pakistan, and few other countries who don't have the infrastructure could be left out. So just to conclude, I mean, so this it could there is also a risk that inequalities not only between people but between nations could be widened. And and finally, to conclude, it's there are many good things about AI, but at the same time, unless we look at the challenges, we are not really heading in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Uday. So let me take this opportunity to extend a huge thank you to all our audience members, but especially to our expert panelists who've spent not only the time in whether it's evening, afternoon, or whatever time of the day it is in their time zones to have this conversation, and really proven that if the blue skies are the limit for AI thinking, GPI's AI in Public Policy program and its conversation today has matched its pace in discussion on ethics, governance, and policy making. So thank you very much. And let me invite Uday in his capacity as Executive President of GPI to deliver the final vote of thanks. Please, Uday.
Thank you, Neha, and a big thank you to all the panelists. All the panelists who participated today are part of are members of our advisory board, which is a strategic advisory board in our artificial intelligence policy labs, and which this advisory board gives the strategic inputs for our executive team to work and carry out governance and policy related activity on this. We have more experts who are also part of the advisory board. We will be in subsequent panels. So a big thank you to all our members of advisory board who are also members of this panel, and also to you, Neha, for brilliant moderation, and thank you to all the participants here on, I can see here on Zoom, and also live on YouTube, and on other channels. We will be having series of events and series of discussions. If interested, like I have so many messages sent privately to me here on the chat, so I try to answer them here. It's difficult to answer to everyone one by one. For any future events, you can write to us on AILabs@globalpolicyinsights.org. That's AI Policy Labs at Global Policy Insight. Sorry, that's AI Labs at globalpolicyinsights.org. Or you can follow our Facebook page or on Twitter at Global Policy In. And we are also conducting events on COVID-19 international political economy, and you can find information on that on our social media handles. Once again, I thank you all, and looking forward to meet you all in the next event.
Thank you very much. Thank you.